very good morning, everybody. Hope this finds you well, and welcome to this second in our series of building safety webinars. Delighted to be partnering with ARC, who are our presenters for today, and got us off to such an excellent start about 6 weeks ago with the first in the series, where we looked in broad terms at the requirements coming through the Building Safety Bill. Today we are going to focus on probably two topics. I shall talk you through the format. I have to say I'm feeling a bit like the sort of BPF version of Linda Bald here today. I've got sort of these flowers sticking out from my head, and perhaps one of the challenges for me for the next five will be to find new flowers to stick in there. But yeah, the format for today is really a game of two halves. We are going to look at the accountable person in the first half of the webinar, and building safety manager role in the second half. As I've said, if we need extra material, then we'll touch on the golden thread, but I suspect that will not be the case. In each half, we're going to do effectively three things. Firstly, we're going to ask our colleagues from ARC and Anthony Taylor, who's kindly joined us today, to talk through their slides. We're then going to, we've lined up four BPF members, two in each half, who are going to ask a pertinent question from their day jobs, either about the accountable person or building safety manager. And then we'd like to get a little bit of audience interaction, and I've got one or two poll questions for you as well. So without further ado, let me introduce the first half, and the contributors are firstly David Hills. David will be well known to you if you joined our first webinar, director at ARC Consulting, and David has worked, I think, for over 15 years at ARC, previously experience in local government enforcement, engineering and building control, renowned, I think, throughout the sector for his expertise on fire safety and health and safety issues. His colleague joining us today, Anthony Taylor. I know Anthony well from the splendid work that he's done on our building safety manager role with Working Group 8 of the Industry Response Group. Anthony has then been, I think, devoting quite a lot of his time to the Building Safety Alliance, which is seeking to establish a register for building safety managers. Anthony, over 35 years experience. Those in the sector might know him from his days as health and safety director at Avison Young. And our two guest question askers are firstly, Richard Frost from the Crown Estate. Richard is Health and Safety Risk Manager there. And Robert Dean from Schroders. And Robert is Head of Residential Asset Management. So without further ado, let me hand over to David to take us through the first slides.
Thank you very much, Ian, for the introduction. David Hills from ARC Workplace Risk. So the accountable person. What I want to do very quickly is just to take you through the actual role of the accountable person. Who is the accountable person? And very quickly think about the arrangements and the responsibilities that the accountable person actually have. Now, the powers that mandate the accountable person and those responsibilities are actually found within Part 3 of the bill, which we all know is actually currently going through Parliament. We know that there have been some significant changes within the bill. And so the slides I'm going to take you through now are those that are applicable as of the 27th of October, because there's been some amendments to the bill on that particular date, as well as look at some of the proposed amendments that have been put forward up to the 2nd of December. So that's just last Thursday. And so whilst today I'm going to be focusing on the accountable person and their responsibilities, I think it's worthwhile reminding ourselves why we are having to think about accountability now. Dame Judith Hackett, in her independent review, effectively stated that as an industry, be that construction, be it ownership, be it management, be it fire safety consultancy, there has been a general lack of accountability across the whole industry. And what was very interesting is that actually you could see that in the actual Grenfell Tower inquiry. So Richard Millett at the inquiry actually invited the court participants to initially not indulge in what he called a merry-go-round of buck passing. And I think you can see from this, which came from The Guardian, that invitation was clearly not accepted. You had Kensington and Chelsea TMO blame Rydens, as well as Artella. Artella blamed Studio E, Rydens blamed Harleys and Celotex and Arconic. Harleys blamed Arconic. Studio E blamed Ryden, the government, Harleys, everybody. So effectively, no one took responsibility at all for the failures that have actually occurred, other than what we heard yesterday at the inquiry, where the government have apologised for not dealing with the issue on a long-term basis. So the role of the accountable person, or the accountable persons, in which case you'll have a principal accountable person, really looks to seek to initially identify who that individual or who that entity is, or who the individuals or the entities actually are, and then hold those individuals or entities to account. Now, this obviously only applies to buildings that are within scope. So this is the high risk buildings. At the moment, we're talking about residential buildings that are 18 meters or 7 stories or above. And the idea is to actually make sure that the accountable person is able to identify and rectify as early as possible any building safety or ongoing building safety matters, and make sure that the standards for residents are actually maintained. Effectively, what the building is trying to do is to hold an individual on what I like to call the accountability hook. Very quickly then, the accountable person. Who is the accountable person, and who is that individual who's going to be on that accountability hook? Under Section 79, the initial definition is that it is any person or entity who holds a legal estate in possession in any of the common parts of that particular building. Now, there are certain other criteria that is applicable to that particular statement, but generally it's those who hold the legal estate. In addition to that, it is a person who, whilst they do not hold a legal estate in any part of the building, they may be under what they call a relevant repairing obligation in relation to any part of the common parts. As I said, there's certain criteria that need to be applied. For example, the role of RTMs and that's held within common land. But effectively, that's the two elements of the definition of the accountable person. I think it's going to be very interesting to actually look at what the accountable person is not. The accountable person is not going to be a person who has each long lease of which the estate owner is the lessor, and provides that a particular person who does not hold the legal estate in any part of the building, but is under a relevant repairing obligation to all of the relevant common parts. So if a lessor has actually handed over a complete, all of the common parts to another body, another entity, another individual, in a respect of a relevant repairing obligation, then you're not the accountable person, that other person is. And in addition to that, it is where all repairing obligations relating to the relevant common parts have effectively been handed over to an RTM. Then you would not be an accountable person, but the RTM therefore takes over that accountability. So you can see that there are many nuances about what and who the accountable person is. It is an individual or it is an entity. There's been many movement or much movement in respect of whether there is going to be a legal requirement for an individual to be nominated within that entity, and that is up in the air, I understand, as it is at the moment. Just one other element, which is very unlikely, I understand, If the building is on common hold land, then the common hold association is that accountable person for that particular building. So I've mentioned accountable person, but we've also mentioned the fact that there may be more than one accountable person. And so what we do have now is the principle in the bill of a principal accountable person. And what effectively that means is that where you only have a single accountable person in a building, then that person is the principal accountable person. And there are certain requirements on the principal in respect of their responsibilities and requirements to deliver certain information to certain bodies. In addition to that, if there is more than one accountable person, then the principal accountable person is going to be the person who actually holds the legal estate in possession of the relevant parts of the structure and the exterior of the building. So I think you can see, therefore, that if you have a controlling interest in a property that is within scope, then you are going to be either an accountable person or a principal accountable person. And therefore, you are going to have to make sure that you are meeting the requirements of the bill as it stands at the moment. One of the interesting questions that we often get asked is if there is going to be a problem between the two. So if we have a number of accountable persons who cannot agree on who that principal accountable person is going to be, then effectively any disagreement, any unwillingness to actually accept the role, then the interested parties, and those interested parties are effectively the regulator, may ask for a tribunal to actually determine who that principal accountable person and the accountable persons actually are. So as you can see, the accountable person is quite a complex position. It's one that is really going to push a number of organizations to look very deeply on where their responsibilities are and who within that organization will have to take over that particular role. The other area that we often get asked is, what's the difference between an accountable person and a responsible person? Clearly, the bill acknowledges that there are going to be circumstances where we are going to have an accountable person or a number of accountable persons. But effectively, what we've got is a bill that's going to set out that we've got somebody who is now going to be held to account, be that an individual or an individual organization. And they are going to be held to account for considering building and occupancy safety. And the safety element in respect of the Building Safety Bill is currently purely looking at fire and structural safety. What the Secretary of State effectively has, though, is the capability to extend that out to include other areas of safety. And that's effectively what the bill gives him. It gives him the opportunity via regulation to turn around and ask Parliament to actually include other areas, such as gas safety, asbestos, Legionella, etc. The shift effectively is to move away from what we used to call the responsible person. Now that term will still be in place. Whilst the bill is looking to make some amendment to the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, it is not removing it. And when I'm talking about Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, I'm clearly talking about the fact that the bill is applicable in England and Wales only. That being said, Wales are looking at what or how they are going to be applying it. So a responsible person under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order is any employer within that building or any person who is in control of those premises. And effectively, that means that if you are a managing agent, you are a person in control of the premises. Clearly, as you can see earlier, an accountable person is not going to be, most likely, a managing agent. A managing agent is there to manage the building. And so there's been a very, very clear shift of responsibility from the management and the responsibilities held by those who manage to the owners and the accountable persons. So it's very, very clear that we are going to have those two parties involved. I think it's also important that we actually understand that an accountable person can in fact be a responsible person as well, where they have any control of the premises. So the role of the responsible person is not going to move, it's not going to change. I think there will be a shift to the accountable person to take accountability for what the building safety manager is doing and for what the managing agent is doing. And those two are not necessarily going to be the same, and Anthony, I'm sure, will take you through that in a few moments. So there is some very, very clear differences. It comes down to the accountability element, but we are going to have to contend with over the coming years with clearly those two roles running in parallel. The last slide I want to take you through is just really very, very quick overview of what the principal accountable person has got to do and where the other accountable persons have to interact with the principal accountable person. So the principal accountable person, as I said, under part 3, has probably around about 21 sections within the bill, and it explains all of the particular requirements. And the first requirement is to actually receive from contractors and designers and other bodies, such as having a completion certificate, information. That information has got to be held by the principal and any accountable persons as well. It will be for the principal to register the high-risk building with the regulator. And it's also going to be down to the principal to apply for what is called a building assessment certificate. And that will have to be applied to the regulator with an appropriate fee. In order to apply for that, there's certain mandatory information that you've got to provide. Once you have been able to provide that information, and once that certificate has been published, then it is your responsibility, the principal's responsibility, to display that building assessment certificate at the front entrance of the building. Effectively, very much like the licensed premises approach, we're not suggesting that name is going to have to be above the door, but the concept of that is the concept that's being applied here. In addition to that, the principal has got to now prepare and submit a safety case to the regulator. And as part of that, they have to undertake a fire risk assessment and then make and develop a plan to prevent major accidents. And that plan will include how are you going to manage the issues that are being raised by the fire risk assessment. In addition to that, they have to develop a residents engagement strategy for the entire building and gather, maintain and store what everyone is now calling the golden thread, and make that relevant information available to the interested parties. And the interested parties are going to be clearly the regulator, certain statutory authorities, other accountable persons, as well as residents as well. So there's certain mandatory information that has got to be provided to the regulator when the regulator asks for it. So the regulator at any time can ask for information from you about that particular building. And then the one that Anthony is going to be dealing with is actually to agree and set out the terms of appointment for a building safety manager. So they are basically the elements, the responsibilities under the building safety, the bill, for both the principal and the ones I've highlighted there, it's for any accountable persons. So, for example, the principal has to look at a fire risk assessment for the entire building, but as an accountable person, I will be responsible for ensuring that my fire risk assessment for my areas have been undertaken, that I've actually got the residents engagement strategy for, and I'm responsible for ensuring that it's delivered to the appropriate residents at the appropriate time for the areas that I'm responsible for. So effectively, yes, the principal has got to look at the entirety But the accountable person has got to now look at those particular areas. They were the slides I really wanted to take you through today. Back to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, David. That was excellent at condensing a lot of information and quite complex information into a relatively small number of slides. Very, very grateful for that. As said, we're going to sort of turn to a couple of PPF members, ask them to set a little bit of context and provide a question for our guests and hopefully illuminate some of the issues that broader membership is facing with the bill and the application of it. So delighted to turn to our first question, which is Richard Frost from Crown Estate. Richard, would you like to give us your context and question?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and thanks, David, for an excellent lead into the whole discussion. So for those unfamiliar with us, the Crown Estate was established in 1961 by an Act of Parliament. Our purpose is to sort of create a lasting and shared prosperity for the nation, and we're committed to a sort of safety first approach. We have a very wide remit that sort of covers sort of coastal foreshore, windshore licensing, and all we are custodians for the Great Windsor Park. In terms of today's discussion, we have high-rise residential buildings in our regional and central London portfolios, with London sort of focused around Regent Street, St James and Regent's Park. We actively manage a proportion of those through our managing agents, and alluding to the earlier discussion, we intend to appoint our managing agents in that building safety manager role. So we're looking to appoint those early. So sometime next year, they're looking at recruiting currently for leads in that space. And again, alluding to earlier part of the presentation, we see that role possibly expanding into a fully sort of building safety manager role. So picking up asbestos management, electrical safety, water quality management, and other issues there. However, within our portfolio, we have a number of head lease and right to manage properties, and we've covered a lot of sort of clause 69. But my question is, under fully repairing and insuring lease where the landlord has no responsibility for common parts, will the landlord have any duties under the Building Safety Act? And how should the landlord protect itself against tenant insolvency? And probably those questions sort of apply in a similar vein to right to manage properties as well.
Okay, let's just deal with the last part first, because actually it's a relatively simple part to deal with. I'm not too sure how you can protect yourself in respect of the bill from tenancy insolvency, unless those tenants are accountable persons. If they are accountable persons, then the regulator has the capability, if the accountable person for a particular part of a building, or the principal accountable person for the entirety of the building is not doing their job or is unable to do their job, then they are able to step in and take on what we call special measures. That has to go through tribunal, that has to be applied for by the regulator, but the regulator will therefore be able to step in and will therefore be able to use what's called the building safety charge, which will be a new form of service charge, which will separate the service charge arrangements to a building safety charge, and that will be available to the accountable persons to complete their roles. So I'm not too sure how you can protect yourself against tenants insolvency, but unless, of course, those tenants, as I say, are accountable persons. There are sections within section 69 that detail elements around the landlord. Landlords, if they have a full repair and insuring obligation, then effectively they will become the accountable person. And if it's for all of the common parts of that particular building, then you will no longer be the accountable person, the landlord will be the accountable person. So I'm not too sure if that's fully answered your question, Robert, but hopefully that's answered those particular parts. But I just one thing I would say is that what we have seen since the introduction of the bill and the October changes, we have seen some interesting changes within some of the definition areas. So it would not surprise me as we're now coming out of the committee stage through report stage into third reading before it even hits the Lords, that we start to see some additional changes, because we are aware that there are currently 25 amendments that the Speaker has at least accepted that he's willing to consider in Parliament.
Yes, I think that's very helpful. I think the question we have is, currently we have a very light touch, like probably our peers in regards to FRI leases. And if we have that sort of clean lease, as it were, we think we're sort of distinct from it. But I could foresee those tenants maybe coming back to us for structural information on the original build, and just interested whether that might actually be captured in the sort of requirements of the bill as it develops.
The golden thread, which it details all the information that's going to be required to be held by the principal accountable person and the other accountable persons, will seek to gather that information from, I believe, various parties, probably about 20 to 30 different parties that have been involved, not only with the ideation of the building, the inception of the building, the design of the building, the construction of the building, the handover and commissioning of the building, to how it's been built, how it's been used, how it's been refurbed over the years into its current use as it stands now.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
If I could, and thank you, Richard, very much for contributing today, and pass to Robert, our second questioner.
David, thanks very much for that excellent presentation. Just for context, I work for Schroeder Real Estate Investment Management. And currently our residential focus is generally around one listed real estate investment trust specializing in ground rents. We use a single managing agent on our managed estate, but around 2/3 of the portfolio is resident management company controlled. David, you spoke briefly about accountable person, principal accountable person being corporate entities. Do you feel that it has to be an entity or a named person? I'm concerned because my colleagues in insurance say that professional indemnity for a single person undertaking this role will be practically unaffordable if it was obtainable at all. And then the second part of my question would be, if it's an entity, are there going to be named individuals, or would it be, say, all of the directors from a particular SPV?
Okay, so thank you, Robert. That's every time you ask a question, Robert, it's always a very interesting one and actually quite complex. Okay, so in respect of the entity element, there have been some changes. Initially, there was going to be a requirement to have a named individual within the accountable person, where an entity takes or is that particular accountable person. Interesting reading through the most current version, that seems to have been removed. I may be mistaken, but it doesn't look that way. One of the things that we've got to think about, though, is the introduction of the idea of consent or connivance. And consent or connivance means that it doesn't matter where you are within that entity. If you have a controlling interest, or if you have a method of control, if you are a director, for example, if you are a manager, or if you are in a post which purports to be one of those, or even the company secretary, then it doesn't matter how far away from the coalface that you are, you have a responsibility not to allow inappropriate safety practices and you're not allowed to encourage inappropriate safety practices. And it goes back to a 2011 case called Regina versus Hutchins and Chamblois. And that consent and connivance requirement effectively means that, from what I can see at the moment, and again, I think this is very fluid, but at the moment, I would suggest that it's going to be the whole board, because they are all directors, and it doesn't matter how far away from the coalface that they are from safety, they have a duty. And it looks like it's going to be the entire board. And so therefore, I think insurance may be an easier way of dealing with it. But again, that could change, and I may have misread the requirements, but certainly from our understanding, that need to have a nominated individual within an entity appears to now have been removed. But again, that could go back in. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much to both Robert and Richard. We are just about sort of halfway through. We wanted to finish off this section of the webinar with a poll for our audience. So I could ask my colleague Michelle to conjure that up. Whilst she's doing that, one of the questions that's come up through the chat has been, so through the Q&A function, has been that will we distribute the slides? And my apologies, I should have said perhaps at the start that yes, we'll make sure that those that attend today and those that signed up get copies of the slides. So just to answer that one, we've got the poll there, and if you could indicate your particular answer for the audience. And I'm going to ask Michelle to multitask and say goodbye to Richard and Robert, and if we could bring our second set of questioners for the building safety manager. Thanks again, Richard and Robert. The second part of our webinar is looking at the building safety manager, and for our questioners, we are joined by Julia Webb of Dorrington and Al Beavers from Argent. Julia is a group building surveyor at Dorrington. Al is a head of health and safety at Argent. Delighted to have you both join us. And if we could, Michelle, conclude the poll, and perhaps you can conjure up the results. Just about a sort of winner, not discussed yet, appointing the accountable person, but aware it's coming. And yes, but no conclusions yet. Perhaps as expected, given the status of the bill at the moment and some of the changes that David has set out. But certainly on the radars of most of those that have joined us today. Ask our second speaker today, who's going to take us through a few more slides, is Anthony. I'd obviously introduced Anthony at the start. Delighted to have you join us, Anthony. If you could take us through building safety manager and the what's and wherefores of that.
Yeah, firstly, thank you very much, Ian and the BPF and ARC for inviting me and the Building Safety Alliance to give this chat, and I hope that any questions that come, I can hopefully answer them. But let me carry on. I've got a number of slides which hopefully over sort of 10-15 minutes I shall whip through the high-end bit of the Building Safety Manager. As David has mentioned, the bill is still going through its process. So what I'm reporting to you now is my best and my colleagues in the Alliance's best view of where matters are at the moment, but things are a bit fluid, and certainly down in the weeds, there are details being worked through, let's put it that way. So anyway, as David has said, the accountable person, the principal accountable person, has got to appoint a building safety manager. One other thing that's very important to understand from this role is the responsibilities in the name. The accountable person is going to remain accountable. The building safety manager is going to manage. The building safety manager is not a duty holder. The accountable person is. So the accountable person cannot contract out of their legal responsibilities. None of that will be very surprising to people, but it's worth making the point. The building safety manager role, as I can say, can either be undertaken by an individual or an organisation, in a similar way that many of the duties within this new bill can be taken on. The role of the building, I'll come back to individuals and organisations in a minute and separate them a bit, but the principle of the building safety manager, whomsoever that happens to be, is to support the accountable person in all the various tasks that David has just described. Fundamentally, it is understood that accountable people in general are highly competent people in doing the job that they do at the moment. They don't often get terribly involved with the day-to-day running of a building. And again, just to remind us, we're talking about the residential bits of an 18 metre or 7-story building residential. So the intent is that the accountable person will delegate a lot of the work to a professional building safety manager. David has also remarked that the bill itself deals with spread of fire and structure only. So this bill sits on top of all the existing legislation and regulation that is needed to operate a building safely. And I shall come back to the reasons for that. So the day-to-day management, the strict role of the building safety manager under the Building Safety Bill or Building Safety Act, as it will become, is the management of spread of fire and structural safety of these HRBs. Now, given that the intent of this and the intent of almost everybody involved, the point is to get residents safe, feeling safe and understanding they're safe in a building. Now, there is more to operating a building than spread of fire and structural safety. So we need to have somebody who has a much wider holistic view of how to operate a building in the view of the people who are building the PAS. I'll come on to that, who is going to describe the competencies of the building safety manager, and then the various bits of guidance that the Building Safety Alliance and others are trying to work through. So the building safety manager has to be competent to undertake the role. We are writing currently PAS 8673 that will set out the competencies required for somebody to become a competent individual. Once they've been assessed, I'll come back onto this, but once they've been assessed, they go on a register. They will then be appointed by the accountable person or principal accountable person. If you are an organisation that has been appointed as a BSM, then within that organisation, you have to have a nominated individual. So you're either an individual BSM or you are a nominated individual within an organisation. Those two roles are responsible to manage the function of the building safety manager. And therefore, they both need to be competent to be able to undertake that and deliver that function, effectively for on behalf of the accountable person, to ensure that all the duties the accountable person has are delivered. Yeah. The intent is to put them on a national register, and the intent and one of the reasons for the founding the Building Safety Alliance is to provide an independent and not-for-profit organisation to undertake assessment, so we can compare apples with apples when we're talking about who wants to be a BSM, and then put them on a register, because the regulator has stated very clearly that they do not want to and will not be providing a register. It's for industry. So the Building Safety Alliance has stepped up to the plate to deliver it. It's fully anticipated that the competence requirements will include, as I've said, full holistic. Now, the reason I shall come back to it, because we need somebody who's holistic, although if you're going to deal with the regulations only, you've only got to be looking at spread of fire and structural safety. But we believe, as most people, I think, they certainly got to have a decent understanding of public health with all the stuff that we well know, but falls out of the Building Safety Bill. It's all already in existence. So that's fundamentally what the role is to do. Coming on to the competence, you'll see this comes from the work that Ian kindly mentioned that the opportunity to chair Working Group 8, and the job of Working Group 8 was to deliver a competence framework for this new role that Dame Judith Hackett had basically put into her report and has envisaged. So to start with, we had to think about what actually was it that she was envisaging. And at that point in time, we were all looking at much more holistic competencies and things. However, the way the bill has actually come through, as I've said, they've sat it on top of all the existing legislation. I'm not going to go through all of those. This comes out of Working Group 8's work, and it has been given to the British Standards Institution, and I and many others are on a steering group who are working through how this is put into proper, let's say, PAS or standard speak, as opposed to what we did at Working Group. And we're working through that. And I would hope that the PAS will be published probably in March this year, if not a little bit earlier, because we've had to go through it. There are 3 PASs, one for the principal designer, one for the principal contractor, and the one I've been working with is for the building safety manager. At that point, we will then know, naturally, on the steering group for the competence are the policymakers, DULUC, and the regulator and various others. So at that point, we will then know what competencies are expected of somebody who's going to want to be a building safety manager as an individual, or the nominated individual if they're working within an organisation. So hopefully that'll come out. But my point being is that it's wider than fire and structural safety. So I just wanted to go through, again, this is what the Alliance does, but once we've got the PAS, it'll be owned by the BSI. I believe it's going to be free, certainly to start with, because it's been sponsored by the DULUC, as they're now called. And it will set out at high level the competence requirements of an individual or a nominated individual BSM. Once we've got that done, then the BSI, we're in the process of writing what's called a scheme. The scheme takes the competencies at high level and puts them into much greater detail, such that both training organisations and those organisations that will undertake assessment can look into the weeds and see what we need to train and then test these individuals for. So the scheme is being developed by the Building Safety Alliance. Once we've got that, we can then, with others, which will be third-party assessors, work out a process for feeding in these prospective BSMs, testing them against the PAS. And, it's having been certificated against the PAS by these third-party assessors, that does not automatically say that you are going to be appointed. It is one route. And the regulator is very clear that, yes, if you're certificated against the PAS, we will look at that, but we need to understand that whether that the BSM you're putting forward, Mr. Accountable Person, is suitable and sufficient for the actual building or buildings that you're suggesting that they can operate. So it is part and parcel, but not the total necessary for putting into this safety case report that David's mentioned, which goes to the regulator, which once they've accepted it, gives you the building assessment certificate, which is theoretically the permission to occupy. We've obviously got a lot of occupied high-rise HRBs at the moment. There's going to be a transition period yet unknown as how all these regulations have come into the existing stock. So once we've got they're successfully assessed, they go onto the register. It'll be a national register. It'll be operated by the BSA. We are hoping it's going to be the predominant one. Of course, the regulations won't turn around and say it can be the only one. They will not create monopolies. But given the fact that we are going to be a non-for-profit, fully governed, the Building Safety Alliance is an alliance of, at the moment, about 45 of the largest institutions, and insurers are involved. We've got a few investors, and we certainly got the residents' voice. So we're trying to get, if I use the expression council loosely, a collection of representatives right the way across the occupied sector, in order to, as I say, own the scheme so that we can updated as things are developed and people begin to understand what the role is actually going to be in practice. And once we've got that, we are already working on, I've described it as a Haynes guide of how to be a building safety manager. If you're going to be a building safety manager, this is what you do. Obviously, we've got the regulator is also going to issue an ACOP or similar guidance. So we are working very closely on all of this with the regulator and DULUC to make sure that we arrive in the sweet spot so we're all agreed and we're all understanding what everybody's expecting when we actually get to the end of all of this. The end of all of this, of course, is probably somewhere between the spring and the October of 23. So it's not very far away for us to find the BSMs who want to take the role, undertake, they will need to establish how competent they are roughly against the stuff in the PAS. They will then need to go and top up. I suspect most people will need top up in various elements, then to be assessed, then to go on the register. So we've got a way to go. So what is the building safety manager going to be doing? He is going to be appointed by the accountable person or the principal accountable person, and he's going to help deliver in reality all these things that David has spoken about previously. I'm not going to repeat the stuff, but the point of the matter is the building safety manager is not going to be competent as an expert in all of the things I mentioned previously. They can't be expert in all of that. The point of these people, and this expression I've used before, they need to be competent enough to be confident to challenge the people who are giving them expert advice. Because, of course, the building safety manager has this holistic oversight of the responsibility of the building, and he's going to help the AP do all the things that are on the list there in order to deliver their duties as necessary under the law. Now, I just mentioned this is very much, please do not use this by any way as the truth. It's purely an illustration. It's most definitely a work in progress. The yellow line there, we are trying to establish in industry what is a consensus, because on the left you've got the building safety bill and it has all its various bits, and that is not complete. This is purely illustrative. I really do underline that. And on the right you've got all the existing law, health and safety, the Fire Act. We've got landlord and tenant, and there's a number of other regulations and laws. So what we're trying to understand here, and part of the Alliance's job at the moment, is to work with the regulator to say what is in the regulations for this person to do, and what are all the things that have still got to happen in this property, but are nothing to do with the building safety bill. Now that's, David has spoken to you about the responsible person. That comes under the fire safety order. But of course, if you've got a mixed use, the building safety manager has little jurisdiction over the commercial units below, because there'll be a number of responsible persons, but the risk to fire of the residential element above the mixed use commercial units is of course significant, or could be very, very significant. So we are working with others to try and understand where is this cut. And anybody who's been in the business, half as long as I will understand that's actually quite difficult to do. But we're working on it. Beginning to finish off now. So as I've said, the appointment will be under contract. There is nothing in the law to state exactly what this building safety manager is going to do, except assist the accountable person to deliver his role. The accountable person will appoint these guys and girls under contract. So it's very important to get the terms of their appointment correct. So who are you going to appoint? You're going to appoint individuals, you're going to appoint third parties, are you going to appoint somebody who may be part of your managing agent team? Are the managing agent teams suitably competent or have the resources as an organisation to find a nominated individual within their team to deliver it? So there's a lot of questions, and as David said, and as the poll has asked, how are you thinking about dealing with the accountable person role? The next part of this is how are you thinking about having who are you going to appoint as a BSM? And then how are you going to contract them? And my point of that is, what are you going to contract them to do? I've mentioned regulations only. So wherever that yellow line finally sits, probably will be actually defined in time by the guy in the wig. Regulations plus, we're suggesting that's more holistic. So you're going to do the BSB regulations. So this is carrying out the duties of or supporting the duties of the accountable person. Plus, you might be doing a bit of Legionella, and you might do this, and you might do that. Then you've got regulations plus. You might want this overall highly competent person also to take responsibility for your environmental or net zero or whatever. So you need to have a thought of what you want this person to do, because they're highly competent, and you probably won't want hundreds of them, but you do need to decide what it is. That's a very, very high oversight of what a building safety manager role. As I say, the regulations are still a bit fluid. The guidance is the Building Safety Alliance is working very close with the regulator and the policymakers. And we're trying now to get right deep in the weeds to be able to give people a guidance document, as I say, a Haynes guide of how to do it, but we haven't got there yet. So, and if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to take it. I hope that was of use.
Thank you. It was a very systematic approach to taking us through that. So that's great. We've got our two questioners, Al and then Julia. Julia looks as if I don't know. She's impressively in a sort of building site, which is beyond the call of duty. But Al first. Al, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, no, thanks for the walkthrough there. So I'm the head of health and safety for Argent, and over the next sort of 5 years, we're going to be bringing forward about 6,000 homes, all of which will be in high-risk buildings.
Yeah.
And a lot of them will be in a sort of build to rent, where it's going to be easy. We'll be the accountable person. We're up for that, and we're already quite far down procuring building safety manager services. But other buildings will potentially have registered providers taking space, or will have mancos owned by the tenants in place. And frequently they disagree with us on appointments of managing agents or service charge costs already. So where there's disagreement between individual accountable persons, how would you suggest proceeding and actually getting to appointing a good building safety manager?
Yeah, well, this is going to be something that's is going to happen, and everyone's going to have their favourite building safety manager. I can see where company A, who has got a number of property interests, they're going to have a building safety manager, all their things, and another one is going to have a different one. And then you get to the point where you've got your single building with, let's say, 3 or 4 of these accountable persons, one of whom is then going to have to be the principal accountable person. The principal accountable person will be appointing the building safety manager. Now, hopefully they can do that by negotiation. Of course, the issue is A, competence for that particular building, and B, the cost. The cost is expected to be shared out within the building safety charge, although I say that with a caveat, because the building safety charge issues are very much at large at the moment. But there will obviously be a cost, and it will have to be proportionally shared out. If they don't agree, then they will have to go to the tribunal. The tribunal will decide and appoint. So if you can't agree, and don't forget building safety charges and lots of other things have got to be discussed to an element, with the residents, because you don't want to appoint someone that they're instantly going to be not displeased about. So it's a matter of negotiation, but if no one can get to the point where there's an agreement, the tribunal will decide on your behalf. I hope that answers the question.
Well, obviously I wish for a cleaner one, but yes, I think we'll continue to negotiate with some parties and hope for a amount of common sense. But in lieu of that,
that's something we've all been looking for many years.
Yes, no, we started sharing some indicative costs for the building safety charge with some groups, and their eyes rolled, even though the actual numbers aren't there. Any additional cost seems to just get automatic pushback, even though it's for residents' benefit and safety.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is something, and to be honest, industry's faced with this increased requirement, and then we have other elements within with the occupier and the residents saying we don't want to pay any more costs. If they hadn't, in my feeling, frankly, and it's a personal opinion, just to make sure. If you hadn't got to pay the remediation cost of what's going on, you hadn't had to do this, you hadn't had to do that, you're probably quite pleased to pay a reasonable cost to have this new regime put in place to guarantee your safety. But unfortunately, because of what's gone before, we are on this thing, and all these costs, and they are still mounting, and it's something that's got to be dealt with. And one of them, of course, again, is of course insurance, as came up in David's, the question David answered. The same goes for BSMs. We're talking to the insurers, the Building Safety Alliance. We've got insurers in there, so they're listening to what we're saying and what we're doing. But I would say an awful lot of this will depend on the competence of the person, because the insurers are going to have to be certain that they're competent to undertake the role.
Perhaps, and thank you, Al, for your question, and segue to Julia.
Good morning. I'm a building surveyor for Dorrington. We're a private property investment company with a commercial and residential portfolio based mainly in London. On the residential side, we have around 28 kind of core blocks of flats. Mostly built pre-2000, really. So existing kind of 1960s, 1970s, a lot of them. We're pretty up to date on all our statutory compliance, all of our record keeping, held with a database with Tetra. But we've got 3 blocks of flats, which are existing buildings over 80 metres, for which we would be, or somebody at Dorrington would be the accountable person. Just wondering, and I think you've gone through in your presentation, which is really informative, where we're going in terms of the criteria to appoint the building safety manager. But in the interim, should we be looking at pushing forward with that process, over the first period of 2022, in terms of should we be looking at our managing agents or our health and safety advisors, or looking at appointing somebody in-house, or is that kind of not something we can do?
Julia, the answer to that is, as always, multifaceted. You can do all of those things. The issue is, at the moment, there are a lot of adverts I see out there for building safety managers. If you actually read them, which I do, you will see that the roles put out in those are very different to the one I've just described. So I have a concern that people organisations are appointing building safety managers because they think they've got the title and that's the job done. They haven't considered things like the golden thread, which I'm sure you're aware of, and there are various other elements of this new regime, much in excess of a building safety manager. So that's one point. The second point is the PAS, when it comes out, will outline the competence that everyone is agreed in the industry that this individual needs. Now, if the individual's in an organisation, they also need that competence. The next question is, how many of these competent people are you going to want to manage your properties? Let's say, let's rephrase it, how many buildings per person? Which is a question I'm often asked. Working Group 8 said, and I'm pleased that the government has also agreed, that there will be no ratios set down. Because the whole point of Hackett's thing was this building safety manager needs to know this building and its residents and the risks in it and the mitigation of it with some intimacy. And that is the whole point of this. So if we're going to get a building safety manager to run 60 buildings, to me, that's, that concept has evaporated. But it has got to be down to the complexity of the building. It's got to be down to the competence of the building safety manager. It's got to be down to the safety management system that you as a client or an accountable person might be running. So there's that section. Then if we go into organisations, let us take a managing agent as a typical type of organisation that might be dealing with it, or it'll be an FM organisation perhaps will be looking at it. I know that there are certain accountable persons who are trying to worm a few words into the existing property management contract. Now, to me, that would be an error on both parties, because they're totally different things. The managing agent property management stuff has been going on, is working very well in most sectors. There are some bad apples, which is what we're trying to get rid of. But this new role is different and additional. And it has, it has the insurance issues with it, and it has the competence issues. So if you're looking at an organisation, the organisation is going to have this competent individual, and there are many models evolving at how organisations are dealing with this. You might have less competent but upcoming building safety manager. Let us call him a building manager for the sake of at the moment. So haven't gone to and you might have one of these. So this is what I was saying. People really need to think is how they want to manage their estate within this regime. And many different models are evolving that suit different regimes. I don't know if that quite helps, but I would say, until we've got the PAS, we don't know what the competence levels are. Once we've got the PAS and we've pushed them through, and providing the Building Safety Alliance can put in line what we're planning to do within very short order, I would start recruiting them now, but with an idea very clearly on what you're trying to do, and understand that the competencies haven't been decreed, and I can't tell you what they are now. I've got a pretty good idea where they're going, and they're not far off what I put there, but until that's published, it isn't published.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. It's good to know that the PAS is coming and there's somewhere to go in the end. Thank you.
Oh, there will be, and I'm hoping the Alliance will provide the other end of it.
Yeah.
Because the PAS is quite high level on purpose, give opportunities for people to do these things themselves, but we need to be very clear on who's being assessed for what at the other end. So to put them on a register, and of course to manage a register, we've got to be able to put people off it.
Yeah.
There's another insurance issue we were trying to deal with, but I hope that helps, gives them a help.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie, for your question, and a little bit more insight on where that's all heading. Not quite the end answer yet. We're going to have a quick second poll. I'm sort of conscious where we're running up against time. Apologies to those that have put questions in the Q&A. We'll make sure we come back to you on those offline. But we always knew today was going to be tight, given the two really sort of essential bits of the bill that we wanted to cover. So the second poll just asks you to indicate where you think you'll be sourcing your building safety managers from. 4 choices there, starting with internal and going through to a specialist building safety management firm. Let's have your responses to that. And whilst we wait for those to come in, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and firstly say that the third webinar in our series we're hoping to organise on the 19th of January, and I suspect that will pick up the golden thread. So look out for details of that. We'll hopefully get something out before Christmas, so you can start signing up for that. I'm extremely and sincerely grateful to all our contributors today. I think they've taken us through a huge amount of information, asked some really intelligent questions, excellent presentation. So thank you. Obviously no applause on Zoom, but a sort of virtual applause to all of you. Thank you for your contributions today.
Ian, if anybody does have questions that I can answer, if they put them through to you, I will do the best that I can to put them back. So just
exactly the same.
Feel free, any of the audience, to email me, ifletcher@bpf.org.uk, and I will happily put you in touch. Let's conjure up the results of the poll.
The drum roll, please, Ian. Yeah.
Yes. It's going to be like Strictly, isn't it? But here we are, and very, very split. So slight main managing agent or facilities manager just in the lead there. About a third of the audience wanting to train up through their organisation. And we've got obviously multiple responses because there may be multiple building safety managers. So a managing agent facilities you point outside the organisation, or a specialist building safety management firm running at about 20% each. Thank you. That's been really helpful to understand, and I'm sure for some of the contributors as well today. Just leaves me to close the webinar by last one before Christmas. So let me wish you a very peaceful and enjoyable Christmas when it comes. And as said, hope you'll join us on the 19th. Thank you to everybody for tuning in today. Cheerio.
Thank you, Ian.